Hello everyone, my name is Timothy Rhandir. I'm a professor in University of Massachusetts. I specialize in water resources, ecosystem services, and also policy. Um, I also teach and do research, and I'm so glad to speak with you about one important topic, which is how water, ecosystems, and people connect with each other. So some of the things I'll be speaking is I'll be focusing on why water is a unique element, especially when we think about life. Um, Water has some unique properties, chemical, but also physical properties, which actually makes water is essential commodity for sustaining life. For example, the specific gravity, but also the capillarity process, the the type of bonding between within the molecules um, it creates some sort of a dipolar nature. So that means each one of these properties actually creates very unique um, connection to particular life functions. For example, the universal solvent of water is actually, that's how it's actually creating a unique functions of removing waste in our systems, moving water within our body, or elements within our body. Um, how water is actually being pumped through the trees. It's the capillarity process, but also nutrients are also moving because of the universal nature of water. So all these actually creates a very important aspect on why water is a very important for any type of natural functions. I wanted to focus on the unique properties of water, but also I'll be connecting with why people should care for that water, but also the connection to the nature and ecosystems. So when we look at ecosystem services, so the ecosystem services are variety of things which nature provides. And actually, many of the societies primarily depend upon these for sustainability and survival. For example, we have regulating services, we have provisioning services, but most of the time our services, we only focus on provisioning services, which is primarily commodities we extract from the nature itself. For example, provisioning services can be the food we extract, the honey we extract, the bushmeat we extract. So all these are provisioning services. But nature also provides a variety of other services like regulating services. They also provide cultural services. Many of the societies have very important connection to ecosystems for providing basis for their cultural identity, but also um, uh, cultural importance of nature themselves. And then I will use this one into creating some sort of a connection to why people should care. So the connection of water, the ecosystem services, and people become a very critical on any societal survival. Um, we are facing huge amount of issues worldwide. We are losing a lot of species on a rapid scale nowadays. We are also experiencing huge amount of floods and droughts. We are also experiencing critical impacts of climate change, and we are also, along with that, we're also seeing there's a rapid increase in population itself. So my observation of all these problems are sometimes related to our um, notion of how we can actually achieve sustainability at all aspects. So sustainability here is not just ecological or environmental, but sustainability also can be economic and also social sustainability. All these become very important. So when we have a sustainable solutions for all this, achieving these ecosystem services, it is essential that we look at this complexity with with a focus on that everyone should participate in maintaining those services. In order to do that, one thing is we have to zoom out much farther above 300 feet or so, or more, 30,000 feet or so, to look at how our landscape looks like. Our landscape is a mix of a lot of types of ecosystem services. So what people change rapidly, We tend to actually focus on a lot of housing, transportation, roads, and parking lots. All these have big impact on how it is actually changing the hydrology. And that hydrology now changes your ecological processes. And that connection needs some sort of a high amount of awareness on how we build our own housing, or how we build our systems, urban systems, how we build our impervious covers, the so-called impervious cover. And so one of the important connection to water to ecological systems is the hydrographs. Hydrographs are something which essentially says how your water is running off over time. As we change our landscape, as we remove trees, we remove vegetation, we are essentially changing that hydrograph. We essentially are making it much more higher pulse. That means we will now face more floods, and it doesn't have much time to stay. That means you lose recharge. You lose groundwater. You lose a lot of this soil moisture. So our emphasis should be on looking at landscapes as a very critical ecological structures, so that we actually maintain the water hydrological cycle, but all the ecological cycle of soil functions, the food webs, and also some of the aspects which are very fundamentally critical for any type of societal survival. So one of the focus of my research is increasing the resilience of any type of ecosystem. So resilience properties are very important in the sense, how would we maintain these ecosystem services in spite of having shocks? So they should come back in a reasonable way, not to lose all those ecosystem services. So shock can come from high amount of temperatures from climate change, shock coming from urban impacts, shock coming from any type of population densities where they are polluting huge amount of waters, shock coming from removing forest area, deforestation. And all these actually shocks actually create loss of ecosystem services. So in order to make a resilient strategies, it's essentially important that these shocks can be absorbed by the system through certain very important strategies, that they will bounce back and bring the ecosystem services to those systems which are exposed to those stresses. And so resilient strategies are not just structural properties, but resilient strategies can also be people. How people can actually maintain certain important functions, create some sort of educational process, awareness. Like what we are doing in this garden is a beautiful one, because it creates huge amount of awareness. It actually, people are now engaged with nature, and when that engagement happens, that's when they can actually ask that question on how their own behavior, when they go back home, can build a much more larger resilient society. And that is the key element of resilient structures. So I want to focus on some specific element of what we could do as a government or as a society, and also as a common citizen. In a government level, it's very important. I want to highlight all these stakeholders are extremely important in making a change. At a government level, it's primarily providing sufficient incentives for communities to actually engage in conservation. Those incentives can be in the form of cost sharing, uh, trying to actually bring in some specific elements of revenues, which will help with conservation activities, conservation financing, and also some specific elements of individuals, on how individuals can make a change. When they consume certain products, when they consume water, now they have to some sort of think about what is that impact on that local ecosystem. If you are using more water, that means less is available for others. If you are using a particular product and you're consuming it, now we can think about that product has some sort of embedded resources within it. It has gone through huge amount of water to produce a particular hamburger. That means that one is not thought about when we are eating in a hamburger. Or when we have a gallon of milk, it has so much water which has gone into it to produce that 1 gallon of milk. So that's virtual water understanding should be there, and how we could actually conserve by our own behavior of consumption, and also using water for certain things. So we can actually using at a household level how we can actually minimize in terms of our own demands, because value of water is not just for people. Water is also used for ecosystems. Uh, in the rivers, there is essential water flow needs for fishes and some of the macroinvertebrates. So if the water river levels goes down, that means you lose those species which are very sensitive. And many of the endangered species, we see that they are losing that habitat, whether it's an aquatic habitat or a terrestrial habitat. And another more important one, which is highlighted in this garden, is the pollinator ecosystem services. The pollinator species and how they are essentially extremely important for food production, but also creating this huge ecosystem services, regulating functions and everything, and how individual organisms are actually participating in helping to build this bigger ecosystem services for our own society. That we are not paying them, but we essentially don't recognize it. And much how we recognize it is primarily conserving them, recognizing them, and whatever we do, the main thing is to see how we can actually minimize any type of damage to those vital functions they are providing through preserving those organisms which are very important, whether it's a bee species or a bat species or mammals, which are actually essential for any type of dissemination of plant species and plant from one place to other, birds, everything. So you can see that I'm bringing a very complex network of interaction of system on why this is very fundamental for resilience of societies. Not just water, but water entering into the ecosystem, and how ecosystem is now a fundamental for how society emerges, and how society interacts with these becomes very important in terms of whether we are sustainable over the long run or not. So a lot of times the 3 dimensions we often see highlighted in the sustainability is the economic, environmental, and social. We always focus on the economic because it essentially creates a lot of income and everything. We're all happy, but economic resilience has been a high priority, but the environmental resilience we had lost a lot over time, because economics, primarily you exploit vast amount of forest area for producing food, palm oil plantations to produce a lot of profits. Um, and what happens is that now becomes a very important factor in terms of losing resilience for the economics itself, because you're losing the quality of the environment. And same thing with the social systems too. And so when you have unrest, when you don't have people who are happy interacting with nature, or if there are a lot of conflicts, all this actually can create unrest and lose the sustainability of regions. So and 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 it's a very important one for societies to actually think about. So let me give some sort of a statistics at a global scale on why these topics are very important. So we have, no, I'm fine. Thank you. We have, our planet is called as a blue planet. So that means it's a lot of water, but only around 2 and 2.5% of the water is only accessible. So much of them are seawater or anything. So here we are talking about this fresh water, which is a part of that, but that is distributed in different conditions. For example, some are in glaciers, some are in groundwater, very small amount in fresh water. So what we are accessing is a very small amount. So when we think about how much limited that resource is, and on the contrary, how much we are using and demanding and expanding our industries, there is a mismatch. We don't have that limit in terms of how much we should and protect those water resources. So we have, here is worldwide, 2 important functions of water is sanitation and drinking water. And now we see that many of the countries, there's a lot of problem of majority, at least 1 in 3 people don't have sanitation facilities. So think about no sanitation, having impact on health, and also having huge implications on dumping that wastewater into streams and having ecological implications of it. And so one important one which often brings close to my heart is primarily how many children are being they die every year because of lack of sanitation. So for example, 1.4 million children die every year. So this is worldwide. So this is a huge problem. And one important one, I always say, the worldwide, when we look at different countries, there is a inequality of how these impacts are going to. Women are the ones who are highly impacted, because in many countries, women has to have the role of collecting water, transporting it and everything. So you have a huge impacts on their own health, on their own development, skill development, or even, so that is one of the important ones. And even if we saw that when water was privatized, we always saw that becomes, when it's commodification, who is affected is the people who cannot afford it, very poor people. So poor, vulnerable people, indigenous communities are the ones who have a bigger sensitivity to any type of a scarcity of water, either it's water quality, quantity, but also in ecosystem services. So when you have loss of pollinators, let's say for food production, when food production goes down, that means who are affected primarily the poor households. They don't have any type of a buffer for their economic losses. So you essentially gone into some sort of a poverty, migration, enter into huge amount of problems because there's no employment. So these are some things we have to think about ecosystem services as a way of sustaining societies. And another one is half of the, this is for the world hospitalizations, half of the world's hospitalization is because of water-related diseases. So this is a very important one for just understanding the hydrological cycle, but also how, for example, simple things, for example, when you're fertilizing your lawn, when you're walking your dog, taking your, the fecal matter away, all these are very small things that can have a big impact in terms of reducing any type of a water quality implications. That means the individual behavior of saying, no, this is going to have some impact downstream, someone is going to have impacts elsewhere. And those are things, usually it's some sort of a need for awareness. Many developing countries have this issue of, of how this water quality has been impacted, and usually who is affected is vulnerable population who are compromised on immunity. Another vulnerable population is children, less than 5 years old. So all these are ones, I think these are something emerging needs in the future. We also have one interesting thing worldwide is many of the projects fail in the first few years. We say 50% of the projects fail. That's only because people's participation. People participation in projects is a very important one. So you have to buy in why that project is important, why conservation is a very important for the society. And our vision is, a lot of times we focus on short term, what our plan for this year or something, and the corporations plan for quarters, the next three months or something. But our vision should be much more long term. So what will happen next 100 years? And if we have that vision broader, then we will become much more aware. We will appreciate the importance of, let's say, climate impacts, because climate impacts takes long term. Even ecological cycles, and how, for example, if you remove a tree, a huge amount of plantations and have palm oil plantations, that particular original old growth took like many centuries to grow. And so we lose that one, that means the ecological cycle is lost. And it actually huge impacts on biodiversity, impacts on runoff, impacts on our soils. We lose that topsoils, and huge again important poverty of people who are living there. Indigenous communities, they lose their livelihood and they don't know what's happening, because there's no biodiversity, or what they used to see some sort of a high amount of biodiversity, whether they're mammals or tree species or herbs for their medicines, they're losing that. And these are the things I think those who are outside should start recognizing that these people who are living there are very fundamental in terms of protecting that, maintaining those ecosystem services, and also for our own, the benefits are actually not just staying there. It's actually going and having huge amount of implications on mitigating and adapting to climate change type of impact. So here are some specific things. I'm making a recommendation is when if you're considering to actually make a change, enjoy nature. That's what I say. So spend more time with nature. Um, Often there is a huge demand for work, huge demand to make money, or huge demand for other activities, but spend specific time to enjoy nature, appreciate, get close to certain flowers or plants or whatever it is, and see what's happening there. Look closely at some sort of soils, look closely at a leaf or a flower, and how many insects are visiting, and how it is actually emerging and all. So spend some time in actually understanding and appreciating, and I would say just on your own, talk to that nature, just talk to that, right? And I think appreciating it also creates some sort of a change in oneself. Say that, such a, and you'll appreciate, how complex it is. It takes so much time to actually bring that ecological process. And when we have that appreciation, when we just destroy something, you will start to see how much value you lost. You enjoyed that type of type of an activity. Second one is consideration to others is very important. When you think about whatever action you do, your action, if it's going to affect water or if it's pollinators or any ecosystems, it doesn't stay within yourself. It's going to be cascade downstream. Someone is going to have an effect downstream. And I think that is a very critical one we often miss. How many of them we are going to affect? So if you can bring that, what they call it as a move our viewpoint from selfish to altruistic, that is a tough one, but I think if everyone does that, that will be a perfect world, especially in how we could actually interact with nature. And also, when we think about doing something to either ecosystems or water resources or anything, consider thinking about others also needing that water, same thing. Whether it's for food production, for ecosystems, nature needing that water for survival, and even people downstream for drinking water, sanitation, and everything. So if we can think about, I'm living in Bogota, where is my water going? What is my watershed? What are the ecosystems which are dependent upon if a rain falls, a drop falls here and starts moving on a landscape, it actually revitalizes so many things downstream. And that is the one awareness we all should have. Within our house, within the place we are living, within the workplace, we start to think about that watershed concept of how that cascading effect, whether it's a positive or negative, will have many people being affected by that. Conservation is a very fundamental for everything. So conservation of your land, soils, water, microbes, conservation of even the general ecosystem. So understanding how the whole ecosystem interacts, and conserving all the connections is very important. So if you think about an ecosystem as a network, and if you impair one pathway somehow, so you essentially say you're spraying a herbicide or a pesticide or whatever it is, it actually blocks that pathway. That means you killed that particular path. And then it cascades back into low yield. When there is low yield, that means there's no flowering, and all sorts of process are huge impacts. And we're also seeing that when the low yield and the plants are affected, that means there's no further attraction for pollinators. That means over time it goes into a vicious cycle, right, of losing everything. So every time when we think about nature, think about a complex system involved. Even though we may think it is not going to impact, that impact is going to cascade throughout the system. It's what they call it as a butterfly effect. Butterfly effect is small impact, it just blows out into bigger impact. And butterfly effect can go worldwide. Losing the tropical forest to produce beef is, it's interesting, but that has a big impact on the carbon sequestration, but also climate impacts. And that can go all the way, because now you can create El Nino events, huge amount of surface seawater, surface temperatures will change, and eventually all these actually having big impacts on storms, hurricanes, tornadoes. So I'm just saying, how a small impact can cascade into big ones. So everyone should actually look at that, the cascade and the network, and appreciate how those links, even though they sound very benign, or some sort of doesn't have big impact, but in an ecosystem, everything is connected to each other, and that's how we have to think about. One important practical way everyone can be participating in this one is protecting the trees, plants, protecting the biodiversity. So that means if you live in a place where there is rapid amount of loss of plants and trees, try to make every effort to actually plant trees. And trees, not just like one type of a species, but try to actually bring in multiple species so that there is biodiversity. And most of the time, I advise they should be indigenous species which are not the exotic ones, but indigenous species which are fundamental, because we are losing a lot of the indigenous species worldwide, and that is very important one. And finally, I want to emphasize, everyone should think about making a change. Making a change is fundamental. Making change in one's own life is okay, but make a change to the society. So think about this, what I can do for the society. And then your society is, of course, you start with your neighborhood. You start with your the watershed. You can start with your city. And once if you start that one and start slowly moving towards, I think that is the most important one, to recognize boldly volunteering and making that particular change. So if you recognize that there is a problem happening in the neighborhood, there's so much solid waste being dumped on the roadside, or there's so much of spraying going on, or a loss of infiltration, that means parking lots, which are or rapid amount of growth, building houses and rooftops and everything. Think about how you could engage yourself. So participate in some sort of a local governance process. Bring all the neighborhood people together and tell them, create awareness and make a change. And I think worldwide, if you think about areas where some sort of a changes can be made, you can think about many cities where people are also having big impacts on ecosystems. They are creating a large amount of impervious cover, all sorts of things. So I would say that there are options to increase the resilience of those ecosystems, and very fundamental to do that one. And also, I think the role of two things I want to emphasize. The role of all citizens is very important. What I mean by all is, everyone should be appreciated, participated. There's no one should be left alone, whether they are seniors, younger people, old people, women, everyone should, men and all sorts of people should participate. And so that's what makes it equitable. The issues should be equity. Equity is very important. So the power to vote is very important. When you vote, think about these essentially is, so that you can bring the leaders who could make that particular change. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, and I invite you to actually make that change, and thank you very much.